Welcome, everyone. My name's Tom Langen. I'm a professor of biology at Clarkson University in Northern New York. We're very happy that spring is starting to appear up here. The first frogs are chorusing, and the first migrant birds are showing up here. Anyway, we've got a great panel focused on innovative ecology teaching at community colleges. I want to explain a little bit about a water cooler for those of you who have not been on one of these before. So a water cooler is kind of a structured but informal chat discussion about a topic, in this case, teaching in community colleges. And it's intended to get everyone involved. We have a great panel. They're going to present a little bit, talk a little bit about some of the things they do. But then we're going to be talking all together, asking questions and sharing ideas. So one of the things I would like you to commit to is as you hear things that are interesting, add to the conversation. If you've got questions, bring them up. We'll watch. You can use the raised hand emoji or reaction with Zoom. You can also type into the chat. So I'll be watching the chat and we're all there. So you can comment or ask questions there as well. Just know that if there's a lot going on there, I might miss some. So we'll try to bring it up and make sure we're there. Are there any questions about that? If not, we can go ahead and get started. So what I'd like to do is have each of the panelists introduce themselves, where they're at, where they teach, and then talk a little bit about one of the sort of activities that they do, that each does, that is something they do to engage students in active learning. So one of the they're going to tell us about their courses they teach and something that they do. And to start us off, I'm going to ask Brian to introduce himself.
Thank you, Tom. I'm Brian Shmaefsky. I'm professor of environmental sciences at Lone Star College, and we're a multi-campus Hispanic serving institution that covers demographics anywhere from urban to industrial, suburban, and even rural. So it's a really broad audience of students. Some of the challenges we face with teaching environmental science, it is a core science, but it also has no math or English requirements to just basically due to the nature of our incoming students. We also have early college high school students that make up about 33% of our class population mixed in with the college students. So we have a lot of challenges as far as how we approach content. And I don't know how far I want to go with this yet, but what I've learned in the years of teaching this course is my students' greatest concern are more place-based. They're not familiar with things outside of their communities. I also have a student population that does not understand what a natural area really is, and in some cases, they're fearful of what they see in nature. So it's quite a challenge, and even every semester, our demographics can change. So we're looking at a moving target. And I'll leave it at that for our next panelist.
All right. Stacey, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Stacey Kiser. I'm at Langen Community College in Eugene, Oregon. I teach the majors biology primarily from cells all the way up to ecology. And I've been doing undergraduate research coordination here on campus. We started implementing cures with a phenology project, my botany colleague in about 2008. And I was the zoology expert and couldn't figure out how to do that because my organisms moved. But finally, game cameras came in. And so we've been doing undergraduate research projects with students starting in zoology, starting in about 2013. So That's been a great way to engage the population and really help them become members of this science group that we're all in. So I can talk to people more about that.
Great. Thank you, Stacey. Christine?
Hi, guys. I'm actually on my way to DC to speak on the Hill for STEM. And so I'm in transit, but I really wanted to do this. My name is Kristen Girtain. I'm the 2023 New Jersey State Teacher of the Year, and I teach a 3-year science research class in Toms River, New Jersey at 2 high schools there. We are a beach community. It's a very blue-collar county. I jokingly, but not jokingly, say that we can't get a whole food because of our demographics. They have an algorithm for amount of per capita income and number of advanced degrees for a county, and we don't fit it. So that is, one of the challenges in our area, that a lot of my students' parents have not gone to college. Very hardworking area, but I often say very PhD poor. And we don't have a lot of agriculture in our area because it's a coastal plain and beach area. The agriculture is to the southwest of us. So many of my students are not aware where their food comes from. And I'd like to get them outside more and just be able to see more about nature in itself. And we've done some research that I'll talk about a little later.
I'm Kristen Genet. I'm in the biology department at Anoka-Ramsey Community College. We're a 2-campus college on the north side of the Twin Cities, and one of our campuses is suburban and the other is in a rural area about an hour north. I'm on that rural campus today. This semester I'm teaching on both campuses. I've been there for 22 years, and one of my favorite things that I do with students to get them actively engaged is I also embed undergraduate research into courses. And in my courses, I teach general biology 2, which is ecology, evolution, and organismal biology, environmental science, general ecology, and I'm also the undergraduate research coordinator at my institution as well. And so I get them involved both in doing field research. I have a long-term turtle population ecology project. I'm a herpetologist. And then we also use game cameras like Stacey. I also teach online and hybrid courses, and we do course undergraduate research experiences with those, as well as there's another project that I'd love to talk about if others are interested. That is an entirely online using digitized natural history collections data, the BCNet project. So that's another thing that I've gotten involved with in the last several years. But involving students in research embedded into the courses is something I've been doing for about 10 or 15 years. And that has been a strategy to keep me interested and to hook my students in as well.
Thank you, Kristen. Katie?
Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Benson. I'm currently at Clarkson University, but in the past, I've taught at 2 community colleges, Harford Community College in Maryland. It's located outside of Baltimore. And that's just a single campus institution, largely serving folks from the military. Aberdeen Proving Ground is the biggest employer in that county. And so I would say most of my students are either in the military or from military families. I also worked at Yavapai College, which is in Prescott, Arizona, for a few years. And I've taught general biology 1 and 2. That's what I do in my current position. But I've also taught environmental science, environmental biology, and then I had a genetics semester too. So one of the things that I had kind of always done with students before coming to the community college was cures, right? Working undergraduate research into courses. And I've always had kind of access to a really nice genetics lab. The research I'm interested in is environmental DNA analysis. And obviously coming to a community college, I didn't really have the lab space or really the time to do that. So I was able to kind of figure out how to incorporate environmental DNA analysis into my classes by allowing students to design studies, collect the samples, and then actually send them off to a third-party lab to do all of the kind of, molecular biology steps that would be challenging to do with first-year students, and then do the back-end bioinformatic analysis. And that made that really nice and modular. And then we would do in the genetics course a little bit of the kind of follow-up genetics work. If a species was missing from the database, we could get a tissue and sample, and then sequence that and put it in there. And that was a really cool way to introduce them to environmental DNA analysis without actually having to do all of the molecular biology steps.
Thank you, Katie. Laura?
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Broughton. I'm at Bronx Community College, which is one of the City University of New York campuses. CUNY has 25 different colleges, and 7 of them are community colleges. BCC is the one of 2 in the Bronx, and we actually occupy an old NYU campus. They nearly went bankrupt in the 70s, and they sold it to the city for a song, and we got the campus. So we have a lot of actually have a beautiful quad and beautiful buildings, but we don't have any natural areas, and we are smack dab in the middle of a very urban setting. Our biology department is tailored toward health sciences, right? So we have a health sciences department as well, but most of the students going through biology are looking at medical school or other sorts of things. We don't really recruit for ecology. We don't teach ecology. Ecology is on the books, but it hasn't been taught for 20 years, actually since before I came. So I pretty much just teach biology 1 and 2. And we only created a majors only sequence in the last 2 years. So we've been teaching it for about a year and a half now. So I'm just getting into, I haven't done a full cure yet. I'm working my way toward that because we don't have the ability to really, we don't have much space for research and equipment and stuff like that. If we do, it's more genetics and molecular. So what I've been doing is I'm cheating. I'm using, apologies, I hit the space bar and it muted me. So I just put in the chat the link for the Project Eddie site. These were NSF funded things put together a while back. I'm spending a lot of time with my students introducing them to the idea of public data sets, which is really interesting in this particular challenging time as things start go missing. But those are nice because they're pre-made modules that use public data, and you can introduce the students to the type of data they would not be able to collect on their own, at least not in a single class. And so I'm not having them design experiments yet, but I am having them use existing data sets to do the data analysis and learn from it. And I'm finding that it falls really nicely. I managed to do more than 1 in a semester, and I can turn it straight into a lab report. So I get them on, the main pieces of what we're trying to do with scientific method within the class, and get them to actually do both oral and written reports based on the work they're doing. So, yeah, and there are lots of other ones out there. I threw out the Project Eddie one, but there are other sites. Thanks, Christine.
Yep. Thank you. And so, yes, you can see the link in the chat if you don't have the chat up right now. And finally, Heather.
Hi, everybody. Sorry I was late. I had a little link snafu. So I teach biology and environmental science at the Community College of Vermont, which has multiple campuses. I don't actually know how many off the top of my head, but there's a campus within 30 minutes of every Vermonter. So it's like 12 or something like that. And I also teach at St. Michael's College. And I did spend some time, Kristen, on the Anoka-Ramsey County line at Cedar Creek, doing, being a field tech there after college. So I am not sure that I am planning to share exactly the right thing here. I was going to talk about how I stopped causing bad papers to get born into the universe and taught my undergrads how to effectively use an academic database. And am I right that this is just like a little taste of what we're doing, and then we'll get into it a little more? Or am I going to try to cram it all in right now?
Why don't you cram in what you can, give us a picture of what you do.
Sure. Okay. What I do is I find 2 opposing, or at least books coming from slightly different angles that are well researched trade paperbacks. So for example, in my current environmental issues class, I use Defending Beef, which is a Yay Beef book, and Regenesis, which is arguing that we should eat, cultivated mushroom things instead. And so I have them read these 2 books, and then divide into groups. I teach them how to choose a right-sized question, because I find that undergrads usually either want to go too big and say, like, do we get to eat meat from an environmental perspective? Or they choose something that's not interesting, like, that nobody is wondering about. Like, do I get to eat a large steak that's from an industrial feedlot on virgin Amazon forest land every night? Nobody is curious about that. So I basically have designed, like, it's a very OCD research project, so that I can nudge them back on track whenever they go astray. So, I know the sources in the backs of these books. I have them look for the best sources on their topic that they choose. So I've designed the questions. So, for example, we look at greenhouse gas emissions. We look at soil quality, we look at water quality, we look at global agricultural yields and human health. So I can, nudge them if they choose an article about cowboys from National Geographic instead of a peer-reviewed life cycle analysis comparing greenhouse gas emissions from conventional organic and regenerative models. And then I teach them how to search, which they roll their eyes at and they've heard it, but there's a few things that I think students have missed. So I teach them that the purpose is to hone your question as you're searching and figure out the trends in the literature. And it seems that nobody has ever said this before, because that's the biggest shift. That I think most of our students are, I have to write a paper. Okay, here's my thesis. Now I got to find my 5 sources that support my thesis, which no wonder they're bored in. It's dumb. So searching the literature to find the trends and then form your evidence-based thesis. And then I model, what happens when I have them just use academic search premier, and I model what happens if you type in a Google type search, and then I model what happens if you do a Boolean advanced search with a lot of synonyms, and they're impressed. Do they actually do it? Not necessarily, but then I have them do an annotated bibliography and several other steps, and then present their findings. Students ask each other questions. Then they submit it to me. I give them feedback, and then they can submit it again. And often, I think I'm asking them to jump into the deep end, and they're like, at the last minute, I'm just going to doggy paddle like I've always doggy paddled. So that resubmission after I give them feedback is pretty necessary for about half of them to actually do the things I asked them to do. Thanks.
Thank you, Heather. So just to remind everyone, this is a water cooler. And what that means is that everybody is open and encouraged to participate. So if you have something you want to share, raise your hand or put it in the chat. And if you've got a question for any of our presenters or anyone else, raise your hand or put it in the chat or jump in. We'd like to hear from as many people as possible. So I've got questions that I'm going to ask the panel, but I would like everyone to jump in. And so while waiting for that, I'm going to start out by asking panel members, when you teach your courses, the courses that you've talked about here, what is your big objective for your students? What do you want them to know or believe or taken from your classes? Is it the kinds of information and the ways of thinking that will make them successful at a 4-year college, or going into the workplace with an associate's degree? Is it trying to get them to appreciate ecology and the environment and change the sort of practices that they do and be a little more reflective about that? What is it that you want your students to get out of your courses? Kristen?
So I'm a little spoiled at my institution in that I do not teach any of the students that are allied health science majors. So the vast majority of our students in our department are pre-nursing and pre-PTA. But because I only teach the biology majors courses and one non-majors course that is broadly taken by lots of people, non-majors, I do not have most of my courses are biology majors, which means that I get to focus on science as a process. And I use CURES. So you put that acronym in the chat I saw. So course-based undergraduate research experiences, where my students work through the entire process from the background research and asking a question and devising a hypothesis and prediction, gathering data, analyzing, evaluating, interpreting, and then presenting that, disseminating at the end of the semester. And we focus on the process more so than the product, because we know our audience. Our audience are first and second year students. Many of them have not had, any college level biology classes before, or only one perhaps. And they need to learn how to think and how to collect data and how to do science. So we focus on the product more so than, the process more so than the product. And we found that our students, when they transfer, that they are ready to hit the ground running at a four-year institution, having been highly involved in that sort of analytical thinking and active research as a first and second year student, which a lot of students don't get until their junior or senior year at a four-year institution.
Nice. Stacey, how about you? And there's a question a little bit about hearing more about game cameras. You mentioned, I think, your game camera work.
Right.
Yeah, a little bit more about what you do.
Yeah. So, Mike, I appreciate that question about phonology and game cameras. I broadened my definition of phonology a few years ago to include animals, but often we break it down to the plant world phonology, which is what the botany students started doing. We were split up until this is our last year of being split in our third quarter of ecology and evolution between botany and zoology. We're going to have to merge next year from common course numbering and statewide learning outcomes perspective. But the game camera stuff is we're on I forgot to include where our school is. We're on that urban rural boundary. Eugene, Oregon has a lot of native spaces, natural spaces around it. And we're just outside of the city limits of Eugene. And so we have lots of adjacent land that can be used. And we also use some nice parks that the city has as well. So we can get permission from the city to put game cameras out. In particular, if they're developing a new park, we get great shots of organisms, including humans and dogs and things like that. So I keep trying to push my students to count the humans. They are often wanting to focus on the animals that are non-human in there. But my goal for them is to feel like they can ask questions, that they own the data. They know that. They look at the data first. I don't see that. And to get them connected to our local communities and audiences besides myself. So we also get some of them we revise their posters and their reports at the end of the quarter. And some of them present at a regional wildlife society meeting that happens here in February. So getting them on that pathway to connection to the network when they transfer to a university, just like somebody else just mentioned just recently, Kristen, that's what my goal is that they'll be able to jump right in and feel comfortable. And we may even be able to get them connected to give them enough self-confidence to connect to a lab once they get up to the university. So the game camera data, yeah, I have I can share a link to a public Dropbox that I send my students to that has as many of the reports and the posters and stuff that we've gathered over the years. And that's what we have our students do is look at past projects to get an idea for what they might want to do this year. So if you all are interested in seeing some of those products, all student level produced, right? You all know from community colleges that there's heterogeneous products. I can share that in the chat.
Thank you. Laura, how about you?
So a lot like Brian's population, my urban population, Bronx, and if it's not the poorest county in the country, it's like really close to the poorest. So most of our students are local. Most of them are first generation. We have a high degree of food insecurity and housing insecurity. And often if they went to the city schools, they didn't have a lab class in high school. So they start from a very, poor background, essentially, in terms of preparation. And so along the lines of what I want to get out of it, yes, the transfer to a 4-year and do well in a 4-year. So that's why we concentrate on process, just like Kristen and Stacey were just talking about, because a lot of it is just getting them to be willing to try something and possibly fail and understand that failure is a part of science and that you can fail. And the point of the failure is to learn from it and try again. And so in the first semester of our major sequence, we actually have them repeating experiments or modifying protocol for an experiment in order to finish. So they actually don't just do something once, they do it more than once when they're gathering their own data, especially with the, the stuff they can do in the laboratory setting, the wet lab stuff. And then in my column, I mentioned in the chat, I'm doing annotated bibliographies. A lot of that is, I'm trying to get them to understand public data. I'm trying to get them to understand the literature, and this idea that when you don't just come up with something out of thin air, you actually have to have the context for when you're designing an experiment, and that you have to ask questions that make sense logically and that don't defy the laws of physics and some of that sort of stuff. And the logical progression is something they often did. Critical thinking skills are not something that they necessarily learned at the high school level. And so getting them to understand that process of trying something, having it fail, thinking through what could be the potential other parts, that's what we're trying to get with them in terms of the way that the process works within the classroom, so that hopefully when they finish our 2-semester sequence and then go through the new biology major we just finally got past this semester with additional classes in genetics and evolution, by the time they go to the 4-year school, they'll have this relationship to the process of science that makes them less fearful about putting themselves out there and guessing or talking about something. And that's a piece that is really, I think that's the hardest hill to climb with my students, is this idea that it's okay, that if you don't know something, you should ask and you should talk to your colleagues and you should figure out a way to address it. So.
Wonderful. Katie.
So yeah, I agree with a lot what a lot of folks are saying in terms of like just the process of science, and sometimes things don't work out. You get no DNA in your sample, and that's just a valuable lesson. And that's what I always tell them. I can't think of a better lesson to teach you than when things don't work. But one thing that I think is really important for me, and also this is kind of part of my educational experience, I grew up just outside of Washington, D.C., never spent much time outdoors, like never went for a hike, never went camping, didn't do anything like that. Because that just wasn't, what my family did, what my friends did. And when I started at a community college, and then when I transferred to a 4-year school, I ended up in rural upstate New York. And I didn't really know about options in biology that were the outdoors. I never heard of ecology. I knew about, I came in as like genetics major essentially. And I took an ecology class and we went outside and we did science outside. And that just like that just blew it open for me. I had no idea that you could get paid. I just remember, being outside and being like, someone can pay me to do this? Like, this is great. But my first exposure to that was through classes. And so when I was at Harford Community College, we were basically just right next to the Chesapeake Bay, and not a ton of natural spaces, but I mean, more than being straight in the city. And so that was one of the things that was super rewarding for me to see my students like I'd be like, okay, we're going to the nature center, we're getting in canoes. And so many of them had never even been out on the bay, even though they'd grown up next to it, right, their entire lives. So being able to just expose students to ecology, you know, to these type of questions, that's, I think for me, like one of the biggest rewards of doing these type of like undergraduate research experiences is just getting them off campus and outside and seeing so many of them like me be like, oh, wow, maybe this is what I want to do. Maybe I don't want to be a geneticist.
Thank you, Katie. Christine Girtain?
Girtain, that's fine. It's like fight, and pain. Yeah, I teach a 3-year research class. It's high school based, but it's very similar to your undergrad cures. They start with general reading and then work their way up into professional journal articles, dissecting those journal articles and learning how to communicate science both through a poster, a paper, and a PowerPoint of their own original research after they come up with what they're going to do. I compare it to flavors of ice cream. It's my job to make sure that they know that there's more than 2 flavors, more than just vanilla and chocolate. So I try to increase the teachers around me and my own exposure so that we can bring back different things for the students. Some of the students have studied bees and the varroa mites that have been on the bees. We've also done the Wolbachia project with Penn State that was originally at Vanderbilt and looked at mosquitoes to see the prevalence of Wolbachia in those. And we exchanged information with students in Israel because I had met an Israeli teacher at a biotech training. So I just want them to know that, you know, there's more than just being a psychologist or studying cancer. Those are the 2 main things they seem to have a frame of reference for when they come into my classroom. And then getting, you know, that exposure with the journal articles, I think, helps set the stage for when they go off to community college or when they're going to a 4-year school.
Great, thank you. We have a question in the chat from Jordan Hoffman at Delta College, asking about the Game Camp project, but I think in more general is asking about this always difficult issue. How do you try to guide students as they make their projects, whether it's the game projects or others? And right, I think that can be very tricky, finding a happy medium between not stifling the students' creativity interests and helping them find a realistic, achievable study. I have an idea for a game cam project of my own, been thinking about working for one of my classes. And so I'm curious about this. Does anybody have a response to that? How to think about that hard issue between being too directive and having creativity, but something that might really not be practical? Stacey.
Yes, it was really, and I must say, I put in earlier in the chat, scaffolding is important, right? So we have them in the middle quarter, the middle 10 weeks, we give them a project that they learn from. And it's just measuring Wisconsin fast plants and different nutrient applications. They learn that not everybody can measure the stem of a Wisconsin fast plant the same way. So failure, that's our big sandbox, right? But I have found since building up this repository of previous projects, that's how I can get people launched into their creativity. We always have a section on the poster and the reports about what the students from the last project want to do better. So that's a way that I found once I got rolling, and once I got a few projects that I could show students, that really helped me feel like I could give them that space to be creative. But yet, we also have to, I gotta say, it's crazy making next week is when I'm really gonna have to herd them all into a project. And that is the most stressful period in this project is I have to get them settled into projects. And there's a little bit of the like wrangling on, you know, how many game cameras do we have that are working this year and how many can I allot? And there's some trading back and forth. So yeah, your equipment, be honest with the students about what equipment you have and what they can do. And then everybody knows that reining them into a doable project in your timeline at their level is key.
Thank you, Stacey. Kristen?
I just wanted to add into that as when I scaffold, I provide them a list of options rather than open-ended questions. So they feel like they have control because they get to pick from the options, but I've already determined, like what are the suite of independent and dependent variables that make sense given the time constraints and the equipment constraints that we have.
Great. Any more comments on this? We have another question in the chat that actually is related to one of the questions I was going to ask. So Robert Matson posted in the chat, what are some tools for engaging, motivating non-majors? Many of my students are not going on to major in a biological subject at a university and are on other career tracks like health science, IT, business. In my courses, I try to impart to them, excuse me, the basic knowledge to understand what they read, hear in news media, social media, and whether or not it is accurate and true. Laura.
So one of the courses I didn't talk about, which I don't teach anymore, is called is a non-majors course that is selected topics, which I called Food, Sex, and Death. And all we covered was the digestive system, the rest, the immune system, and the reproductive system. And so that gave me, we did the beginning cellular molecular stuff too, right? So basically we covered 5 or 6 chapters out of an introductory biology textbook. And then I did investigations with them that were all applied. So for the food system, for example, we went through what conventional agriculture is, what organic agriculture is, what the miles distance for food from the production to where you get it, like all these sorts of things. We talked about food deserts. We did all sorts of things that was applicable to their own lives. This was pre-pandemic when I was teaching it, and we used to do a pandemic simulation, which seemed very prophetic. We finally, but so there's lots of kind of interesting applied aspects to biology. If you can find time in your class to do a mini project around it, that allows you to actually get the students more engaged with the material. I know we often have a lot of constraints about what we have to cover within a class, but if you can find a way either in the laboratory or recitation section to take something and apply it to especially a problem they have themselves, like a local problem, you can get them more involved. And it's the sort of thing that brings in things like computer science majors and criminal justice majors and people who just, aren't there for the biology. They're there because they have to have a science class on their transcript.
I can add, I teach the course that I was thinking of when I came today is has a lot of non-majors and it's not a lab course. But those are my goals too. I want to engage them. And since it's not like Bio 1, I don't need to use a textbook. So I find those, high quality trade paperbacks are, a way in. And my goal is to, I tell them I want, I want knowledge is power. I want you to be able to use a database and figure out what the truth is as far as we understand it, right now. And you can do that on a topic, you can do that. And then they do it and they do it again. And then I hope by the time they leave, they have some confidence in sort of, are they even reading entire papers in my introductory level course? No, but to scan the finding, to do a good search, to scan the findings, to read some abstracts, and to get a sense of what research is out there.
Great. Katie, Benson.
One of the things that I've always done with my non-majors courses is have a pleasure reading book. That's what I call it. I don't know how pleasurable they find it. But this is not necessarily ecology related, but one of the things I found, they're very interested in their own bodies. And so we'd read like The Body, A Guide for Occupants by Bill Bryson. And I taught Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and like Friday was our dedicated book discussion day. And they absolutely loved that because they were getting the science, but it's already written for a general audience. And you just, pick whatever topics are the best sellers, right? They're best sellers because everyone likes them. And so that's something that I would also do to keep myself entertained, is kind of pick a different book. And so I've done The Sixth Extinction is one that I've read. That one's a little old now. And then Coyote America. So I'm really interested in wildlife biology. So that's a great one too. So I think like having this kind of pleasure reading book, that's added a nice dimension to the class. So it's just not so much like, here's all of biology. It was like we had our dedicated book days on Friday for discussion.
All right, Brian?
Yeah, I love all the dialogue we're having right now, particularly with cures and with practical problems. With my students, a lot of their concerns are very local environmental issues. And even at the beginning of class, I'll ask the students, what do they know about some issues in their area? So we'll look at issues related to cancer clusters, to post-flood events, and to urban heat island, all things that, they never thought about, but they feel the impacts of. And what was really interesting is we're what I'm going to call a science light course, because I can't expect too much data collection, data analysis out of them. But when they have a mission, like for example, our most recent project was looking at a nearby cancer cluster, and students actually dug into the data on what makes a cancer cluster, how do you identify it, epidemiologically. And this was amazing, having them look at and compare two data sets of the area versus a control area, similar population, and then look at the factors that might have caused the cancer cluster. For example, a train yard, a creosote plant, and things like that. And that one, so they're actually seeing that there is science in data collection, and then linking the data, for example, a pollution event to an actual cluster. And I don't like leaving them too with just, doom and gloom environmental science. So we also look at how do we address these issues. And in another class, students were developing or researching nature-based ways of removing creosote that a community can do. So we work a lot with communities in what I call community-based science, where students are teaching community members what's the science behind environmental cleanup, what's the science behind, planting trees, and not just saying this is good to do, but actually here's some data. So, and I'm finding that's very successful, particularly in my population.
Great, thank you, Brian. So what do you find are your biggest challenges for inspiring student interest in learning about ecology and environmental science at your institution? What are the challenges that you've worked to overcome? Brian, can you start us off?
Yeah, just the lack of knowledge students have about the natural environment.
Yeah.
And so we function, so the biggest challenge you run into is, again, students find nature dangerous. They find that they don't know much about it. So I try to go from the familiar, the constructed environment, address the principles of that. Because funny, we use webcams too on squirrels and rats and other things like that to understand their relationships in nature. And then we apply it to general nature, because most of my students don't understand predator prey from the perspective of an Arctic hare and a wolf, but they do understand rat feeding behavior and squirrel feeding behavior, and understanding that, yeah, there are things out there that eat squirrels, and what the squirrels prey upon. So, so my greatest challenge again is translating, teaching them about the natural environment from the urban setting.
Thank you, Brian. Katie?
I think one of the biggest challenges that I ran into was how to get everyone outside. A lot of times, if your campus is in an urban area, you might not have the natural spaces you need to do that. And I worked at university before going to community college. And I could say, hey, everyone, we're going to go meet on Saturday and go here, right? And there's a van. And that you can't really do that at the community. Everyone's working on Saturday, right? There might not be a van. So that was one of, I think, the biggest challenges, and really just had to be creative about that. And a lot of times that meant maybe I was going out for, 3 times if the students could sign up, or maybe make, aspects of it not mandatory. But I think that was one of the biggest challenges, was actually getting the class to a location to really do some meaningful work. And it was never a great solution, right? Sometimes students just weren't able to make it, but I'd always try to get as many people out as I could.
Thank you, Katie. Heather?
I think one of the biggest challenges my students have is that they've been sort of scarred by some experience in the past in my non-majors courses, and they're afraid of math, or they identify themselves as somebody who doesn't do science, or who isn't good at science, or who doesn't like science. And so, yeah.
So how do you overcome that?
Well, I mean, my focus is on engagement, and I try to cultivate an environment where, as somebody said already, it feels safe to fail. I let them resubmit a lot of work, and really pay a lot of attention to like the shame aspect of things.
Anyone else?
I'm happy to address this a little bit.
Yeah.
I think we already talked about the failure piece, and I think that especially urban students being afraid of nature is a big deal. The other piece of that is that they don't necessarily know what it feels like. So, for example, I was showing them pictures of neon sites, and we were talking about the various biomes, and I asked my students, how many of you have walked in a forest? Because if you start talking about, and most of them haven't, right? So, and that's one of the things I'm very cognizant of with my students, is that they often have not experienced the spaces that we're talking about, especially when we're talking about the bigger pictures in ecology, and trying to offer them ways to do that. Because it's a community college and we only have 2 or 3 hour chunks of time, I can't take them somewhere, but I can certainly give them guidance on where to go in the city to experience it, because we have lots of parks, we've got a couple botanical gardens and a zoo and all sorts of fun stuff they can go visit and see stuff. And so if I give them guidance on that, some of them may actually take me up on that. And we can also do that sort of thing with our bio club. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I'm not doing it because, again, we don't have really an ecology class, but another way to do this sort of field experience is there's a couple of the other colleges do bio blitzes using iNaturalist. So I'm going to put iNaturalist in the chat. BioBlitzes are basically large field spaces where you do a big biodiversity survey. And if you, iNaturalist is an app, if anyone is not familiar with it, that helps you catalog diversity. Yeah, most people will probably know about it, right? But I just wanted to pop that in there in case anyone wasn't familiar with iNaturalist at the BioBlitz possibility.
Yeah, I'll just say I use iNaturalist, and I'm at a 4-year college, even with forests right on campus, but a lot of our students haven't had a lot of experience in going back there, and try to get them to go with a friend. So what I do is, they all have phones with cameras. I show them how to use iNaturalist, and I have them go back there and do some mindful thinking about what they see, and then documenting it in photographs, identifying with what they see with iNaturalist. And then they send me a little document with the photograph and what they were thinking about, why it was interesting to them. And they find that really engaging. The ones who really don't know that much, they can go just on the edge of the forest, or they can go in the field, someplace safe. I always have them go with a friend. I just say, you're not going to talk, you'll just walk together and do that. And they find that a way that they can start to, in a safe way, explore that kind of world around them in a safe way, and then document it in a way that shares it. Kristen?
Okay, I actually had to start taking notes because there's so many like threads from the last 3 or 4 people who said things that I wanted to make sure to add to. So hopefully I'll get to these things. So connected to what Laura said about getting students outdoors, I mean, that's completely understandable in a place like the Bronx. I'm in Minnesota and I'm always amazed and surprised when I take students out to do turtle surveys that nobody's been on the water before in Minnesota. So, I mean, even where you think we have ready access to it, my students do not come from circumstances that allow them to get out and explore, which is one of the reasons that I love taking them out, because it's often the first time they've ever been in a canoe. It's the first time that they've ever, walked through, an old growth forest or whatever it may be. Related to the fail-safe conversation that we had, and then a couple things that people said in terms of revising and resubmitting and scaffolding, I shifted a couple semesters ago to an alternative grading scheme, specifications grading. And so my classes don't have points anymore. And I have a very flexible submission and review and resubmission, which did require sort of a paradigm shift in my own mental game. Like I don't do things like batch grading anymore. And but one thing I've really noticed in that shift is it has tremendously improved my relationships and rapport with my students, because I am now the encourager and I offer them multiple opportunities for success rather than being, the punitive point penalizer. And I also don't have any more arguments about like, can I get one more point, or can I do bonus points, or, that sort of thing, because it's just not part of the equation. And then one last thing, is somebody asked in the chat about opportunities to present their research. And that is something I'm actually mired in that right now. About 10 years ago, I don't know what just happened, but I think I'm still here. I think we just lost power. Anyway, now I'm in the dark, but fortunately on battery. About 10 years ago, we started our Oscars, which is the Outstanding Scholarly Creative Activities and Research Symposium, which started as a 1-hour poster session, and it's grown into a 2-week-long, 2-campus hybrid event where students and faculty can present their research, scholarly work, musical compositions. We loop in, our plays and our, graduating students events. So yes, we do offer that, and it's become a really great opportunity for community building for our students as well.
Thank you, Kristen. And good luck with that power outage.
Yeah.
All right. Nothing else. So sort of finishing up, what's some advice you would give to a new community college instructor about teaching ecology and environmental science at a community college? Well, what advice would you give to somebody who's thinking about a career, taking a position at a community college, or who is just starting out? Katie, I'll pick on you. I bet you can. I know you've got great suggestions.
So I think all the stuff that you're hearing, like incorporating cures and all of that, like that doesn't happen overnight at all. You need to kind of set like mini kind of goals. And really with any of these things, I think it just takes practice. And so if you're just starting off, as a new instructor, you've really got to get kind of your course material down and all of that stuff. And then just do something new and innovative and try something new, maybe once or twice a semester, and see how it goes. Like I didn't start reading whole books with students. I just started out with like, okay, we're going to read this one chapter from this one book and I'm going to post the reading, and then just kind of see how it went, And so, we scaffold for our students, but we also need to scaffold for ourselves. And I think that's really, really important.
I think that's a great point. Gillian Schultz has in the chat. Start by making it local and then bring in the globally related issues that come from that. Laura?
So I'm just going to support Katie on that one because I do a lot of faculty training. And one of the things, we have a new faculty seminar, and one of the people on that and our assessment person is like, don't try to do what we're doing right now, just, you know, a little at a time. And she actually starts it as a research project, classroom assessment project, where they come up with the one thing that they're investigating and they collect data during the semester on their class. And those sorts of mini projects help the faculty member understand whether there's been any progress made and whether the thing they're trying, the intervention they're trying, is working. But it also has allowed a lot of our faculty to go on and actually publish in the assessment arena or in the pedagogy arena as part of their track toward tenure. So it not only is it scaffolding for ourselves, it's also a potential research opportunity as well. And it makes our teaching better and lets our students get better at it. So I just wanted to back up Katie on that one. So that is a good idea.
Thank you, Laura. I'm afraid this time has gone very fast, but I'm mindful that everybody has things that they're doing, and especially this time of the year. I want to express my gratitude and thank this great panel. I've learned a lot. It's been very energizing. I can tell you that I think this is great. This is what water coolers are about. And thank you all for a very stimulating and interesting water cooler.
Thank you so much, Tom. And just a final plug, we are having another water cooler chat at the end of the week, but that's mostly about sort of a conversation between environmental science and ecology, what the difference is. But you can also register for that water cooler chat on our website at esa.org. But yeah, thank you so much, Tom, and thank you, everybody.